So now we're going to talk about behaviour management, and just very briefly, we're going to look at how you can empower your staff to feel more confident. Now, that picture may be, well, what that picture shows may be familiar to some of us. I'm sure many of us here who are here today is because we all started many years ago at the bottom of the chain. Certainly well over 20 years ago now, when I started as an analyst, that was a familiar sight. Do feel free to share on the comments if you've ever had a run-in with a contractor or anyone on the site. Let me know. It'd be interesting to see just how many people potentially have had run-ins and conflict issues on site, but feel free. But in the meantime, what we're looking at is, as well as engaging your employees, we can also empower them to feel more confident in the work site. And again, it does link into engagement. Everyone in the workplace has the potential to be subject to conflict, miscommunication, insult, uncomfortable situations, and the such like. So have you actually trained your employees to deal with? We were talking, just a few of us last night while we were prepping for this, and immediately the stories come out. Oh yeah, this and this and that. And it's like, well, we've got guys out there doing the job we were doing 10, 15, 20 years ago. Are we training them to look after themselves? Do they have the confidence to assert themselves? And do they have the backing of your management? Okay, so what we can look at is, well, very quickly, how does communication work? Well, very simply, what that means is the sender encodes, he sends the message, the receiver decodes that and receives it, and then round and round we go. And that's fine. So it's this constant cycle of when you're communicating someone of encoding, receiving, decoding, and the such like. But obviously that doesn't always go to plan. When it comes to communication, only 7% of communication is done by the words. Okay, tone is 38%, and non-verbal is actually 55% of communication. Okay, and it's difficult. So emails, how many people mistake emails because words are only 7% of communication? Now, the great thing is these days is we mitigate that with emojis. And I think emojis are fantastic, because what you're doing is you're taking that 7% of communication and you're trying to throw in the other 38 and 55% for the tone and the non-verbal, and that's a good thing. As remember, you know, body language is so much of communication, as says me waving my arms around as usual. So how can we help to manage behaviour? Well, a lot of this is not rocket science, okay? Using plain language, be tactful, talk straight, give your full attention, be clear, don't hesitate. Okay, and this can be anything from talking to your staff, talking to a client, dealing with a contractor, all these situations. When you boil it down, just being straight and communicative gets you a long way. Okay, but obviously do not make jokes or be sarcastic. Now that's a dangerous road to go down. My joke, oh, it's brilliant, but who knows who it's going to upset. Okay, interruption and interjection. Some people really don't get the difference. You know, to interject is to politely step in and ask to put your point of view across. Interruption is just talking over somebody. Hopefully swearing or be rude or offensive is fairly obvious, as is being hostile or aggressive, though it can be difficult to avoid these situations. And do not humiliate people. That can be such, if you really want someone to come out of their corner fighting, humiliate them, make them feel small. And sometimes it's difficult not to do that when you're dealing with someone who you're really struggling to manage. And obviously exclusion and discrimination are absolute no-nos. So what are barriers to communication? So why does communication go wrong so often? Well, it can just be the environment. How many of us have been in an enclosure with some unhappy contractors, and it might be fine if you could talk to them like this, but we've got the blowers going in the background, the lighting might be rubbish, we're all wearing respirators and talking like that. I mean, you've got that immediate barrier, okay, to there. Then you've got emotions and feelings. Everyone has these, believe it or not. And then if you start introducing things like alcohol, drugs, cultures, mental health issues, there can be age. People don't know how to talk to people who are completely different, age spectrum to them. And even class can have an influence. There are so many barriers that we have to overcome, okay, and why communication can go wrong. So how can we do this? Well, it's back to what we just said. It's all about speaking clearly, one person to talk, don't overcomplicate, be calm. Calm spreads calm. That should be your mantra for dealing with anybody, okay? Calm spreads calm. Signaling non-aggression. The old palms, 45-degree palms are a very powerful tool. Avoid an audience. I've certainly been subject to that. Somebody wanted to have a robust conversation with me and they decided to call in everybody so everybody could listen to the conversation, purely so they could make me feel small, okay? And that is not a nice thing to do. So what you can do is reassure the person, be polite, be smart, put your guides in a good uniform. All these things can overcome the barriers we were just talking about. Okay, the other thing that you can look about teaching your staff, again, it may seem obvious, but touching in the workplace sounds awful, but actually what is appropriate? And certainly from my experience, we've had client complaints from what people think is perfectly innocent touching in the workplace, a hand on the shoulder, a hand on the arm, just one of those, has actually turned into quite a strong complaint and the such like. So what can we look at? Touching in the workplace. So what we need to think about our staff is how we can empower them to understand what they can and cannot do in the workplace. What about handshake? Culturally acceptable, COVID aside. What about a high five? What about first aid? You may need to touch someone in relatively inappropriate areas for first aid, but I'm sure we've all done our first aid training. What you're taught to do is to ask permission and, if necessary, have somebody else in the room. What about touching for reassurance? That hand on the arm around the shoulders. You might think you're being very kind and really nice. The other person might be absolutely hating it. Celebration. We all get carried away sometimes, that big hug. And then the other odd one is pregnancy. Because someone's pregnant, that suddenly seems to give the right for strangers to put their hand on their tummy, which is an odd one. Really, when it comes to touching, handshakes, leave it at that. And it's empowering your staff to really think about, what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. Okay. So what we're going to look at now is a few acronyms of just how we can maybe start to look at protecting our staff. Okay. So what we've got first is safer. So threat assessment. So this doesn't need to be someone's about to clonk you. This could be someone on the phone who isn't very happy. This could be dealing with an awkward member of staff, but it's when tensions are rising. So what can you do? Well, the first thing is to step back, obviously, give yourself and the other person some space. Maybe say, look, we'll do this later. Take the phone away from your ear. Just give yourself a moment. Okay, all these things are fine. Assess the threat. Is this going somewhere or is it fine? Find help. Get someone to join you in that difficult meeting. Get somebody else, pass it on to a line manager to take that difficult phone call. Evaluate your options and respond and review. Actually, you may solve it, it may be going somewhere, but the important thing is empowering our staff to understand that it's not acceptable to accept being shouted at and sworn at or whatever it may be in the workplace, and that actually they have the right to do a threat assessment. They have the right to step back. They have the right to evaluate whether they want to be there or not. Because when it comes to a threat assessment, we can look at POPs, the persons, objects, place, the situation. Who is the person? It might be someone who's been verbally very aggressive, but if they're a frail 90-year-old lady, there's probably not a physical threat there. But if it is someone who could give a physical threat, what objects are to hand? What place? Have you got yourself trapped in a room? Are you stuck? Have you not covered your exits? And then you need to assess the situation. And you need to be telling your staff is, if there is a risk of a situation, it's time to depart. Okay. Nobody needs to work, even in our industry, and fight for the honour of their company or such like. In the asbestos industry, we're not the police, we're not bouncers. We should not be subject to threat and harm and the such like, and it should not be acceptable. So how can we signal non-aggression? How can we calm the situation down? Okay, well, one more acronym, I'm afraid, is PALMS. Position, allow exit routes, don't block in. Okay, so again, this might be in an enclosure with contractors, but it might be that you're talking to a member of staff and they're clearly feeling uncomfortable. You're in an office and you think, hang on, this is not right. Let's move out of here. Let's create some space. Attitude, being positive and helpful. Look and listen, be active listening. So actually engage with whoever you're talking to. Don't just look off into the distance while they're talking. As we said, make space. And then S is for stance. Be relaxed. I mean, we all know what an aggressive stance is. We all know what a calm stance is. There's relaxed shoulders, the arms standing to the side. And these can have huge effects on how we actually deal with somebody. Now, there is always the chance of high-risk conflict. Okay, high-risk conflict is when you're at an immediate risk of being physically assaulted. Now, behaviour management is all about not getting to this point. Okay, it's not a self-defence course. We're not going to start teaching our analysts and surveyors how to take on contractors and such like. If you can start introducing empowerment of skills to pull away and the such like, hopefully we won't get to this point where you're at high risk conflict. But as we know, unfortunately, situations can occur. So what is your strategy if it really is starting to go wrong? Run away. No room for bravery, I'm afraid. In the workplace, that's a road you really don't want to go down. And what you have to do is empower your staff to realise that they can exit. It doesn't matter about your toolbox. It doesn't matter about your kit. It doesn't matter about your vehicle. Okay, they are all replaceable. Okay, if you have to leg it off down the road, that's absolutely fine. And it seems really obvious, but it is amazing where you hear stories, and I've certainly had it, where staff have done some quite crazy things to try and get their kit back, or well, I'm not leaving the torch behind. It's fine. And if you can empower your staff to understand that they come first, I think we can go a long way to helping them protect them. But as I said, that is just a sort of overview of what you can do for behaviour training. I mean, there's a whole lot more to it, and I just think it does go in hand. So we've got engagement of staff and then empowerment of staff. Hopefully you will have a more robust, happier workforce. I'm just looking at some of the comments. Mike, no way. Some of you have had some issues with contractors. I can't believe it. Colette, can you believe it?
Oh, surely not. Yes. Although I think things have come a long way, but there are still instances out there where it does occur, which you can see from some of the comments in the chat. But I mean, I think that your presentations were excellent, Toby, and I think a lot of people will have a lot to learn from them as well. And I think we've already sort of posted one comment in there that everything is going to be available online as well. Because again, it's just about sort of sharing information, whether it's technical
Absolutely.
information or how people can deal with things. So now that was well worth it. Anyway, I'm sure everybody else feels exactly the same.